Welcome to my review for Wallachia for the Switch. It may also be on PC. I play a lot of these type of games on the Switch because, I'm a console player and I don't really have a PC setup for a lot of these like more modern type of games and things like that. My PC is emulation focused. So it's decently powerful, but it's mainly to run like games with graphic filters, like PlayStation 2 games with graphic filters, Wii, and everything below that. So it runs all that shit. But for these games, I usually, this is a game I couldn't get this on any of the other consoles. So the Switch was the only console that I found this on. So it's great on the Switch. As it would be on PC, I'm sure. If it's available on PC, I didn't check. But anyway, this game, the best way for me to describe it would be it's kind of like a mix between Castlevania and Contra. So, the environments are very much like Castlevania. But when you play it, it's going to be more like Contra. It's kind of like a hybrid of a lot of games. It even reminds me a bit of Ghouls and Ghosts with the double jumps. But, you have more control over your jumps. You have mid-air control. It's not like Castlevania where you launch a jump and you're committed to that jump trajectory. In this, you have control of your jumps mid-air. It's very good control. Now, my main issue with the gameplay, it's going to sound like a minor fucking thing, but my main issue, the only real issue I had with the gameplay was when you're mashing rapid fire, or even if you use a rapid fire controller to fire rapidly, there's always going to be certain gaps in your arrows and in your shots, and those gaps can get you hit or killed. So that's a big problem for me. I mean, it's not a huge issue, but it shows up enough to where it pissed me off, numerous times. And it seems to happen more in areas that are more busy, so it might be some kind of technical slowdown causing it. But I'm really not sure if that's what it is. I think it may be. But either way, it happens quite a bit. And it is a big problem, sometimes. But you can still play the game very competently. And I'm showing scenes from my actual playthrough that I did. So I have a tutorial up on the game, which I'll link in the description. And I explain all my strats. But yeah, so it is a challenging game. Quite a challenging game, but you can always go back to the last stage you beat, and you're able to do that through two methods. One, you can leave the system in suspend mode, obviously, and just keep playing because you have unlimited continues. And two, one thing I discovered that was extremely useful for the game, because I had thought that if I wanted to play another game, I had to lose my progress in this and start over. That's not the case. What you can do is, if you select stage 1, where the tutorial is, you can hit left and right on the D-pad, and you can select which stage you want to start at. And then you can just resume from there, and if you die, you can continue from that stage. So you're always able to get, to resume from whatever stage you left off at. So that is a nice feature. Some games like this don't have that, and they force you to restart, which is kind of inexcusable to me in these modern games. But it doesn't have that issue. I thought it did initially, but I was relieved to see I didn't have to replay the entire game. Now, it is a short game. It's probably only, if I had to guess, maybe 30 to 60 minutes if you know what you're doing. I didn't check the completion time again. It's probably closer to 60 minutes. It's a decent length game, but it's about the length of like a Super Nintendo game back in the day where you knew what you were doing. You know what I mean? Like playing something like, I don't know, Super Castlevania 4 or something, and what, you're not dying a lot because you know what to do. So it's around the length of one of those games. But it's great. You have multiple directions that you can fire in, as you see. You have a double jump. And you have about 3 or 4 different magic abilities that you can fire off, depending if you have enough magic points saved up. You don't get tons of magic all the time where you can spam it like crazy, but you get enough times that it gets you out of some bad situations. So it is very useful to use specific magics for specific scenarios, such as you may want to use the invincibility magic for a certain part. It gives you brief invincibility, or you may want to use the magic that's more offensive, like a screen-clearing explosion type of thing. You also have multiple different types of arrows, so you have triple arrows and other strong type of arrows you can use, like explosive arrows, and you can also charge up your arrow shots. Each arrow type, like triple arrows, can be charged up as well and released, which does a lot more damage. So you got all that. You got a slide, which I wish the slide wasn't in the game, honestly. For me, the only time I ever did the slide was when I didn't want to do it, because it's diagonal and jump to do a slide, I believe. And I would slide in the pits and shit. It's just like, for me, I always kind of have a problem with hitting diagonals when I don't want to. Now, the M30 controller is a really reliable controller by 8-Bit Do. I use that mostly for the game. But the problem with that was I could not use the fixed aim because of the way the buttons were mapped. Fixed aim is actually really good. What it does is it fixes you in a fixed position when you hold down the trigger. And then you can just aim freely without your character moving. And you can fire from a fixed position. It's something I didn't use until the very final stage. And what I did was I was alternating between the M30 controller and the Switch Pro controller for when I wanted to use fixed aim. Kind of a pain in the ass. But, you don't have to do that. You could just use the Switch Pro controller. I just hate the fucking D-pad on that thing. So, I mean, you can make, it'll work. You can beat the game with it. But it's just, I fucking hate the D-pad on the Switch Pro controller, and I try to avoid it whenever possible. Otherwise, I think the Switch Pro controller is quite a good controller, but that's a big fucking problem. Because I play mostly indie games on the Switch, side-scrollers and shit. Those are mainly the games I like on the Switch the most. I mean, there's not a ton of first-party exclusives that I really like on the Switch. But, so that's the basics. You have maybe 7 or 8 stages. And the stages do get pretty long. So you only have like maybe 3 lives to beat a stage. Sometimes you can get 1-ups. But, when you lose all your lives, you go back out to the continue screen, which you have unlimited continues, and you'll start from the beginning of the stage. And the final stage is quite difficult. It took me quite a while. What you're seeing here is the final stage right now. And you can see I got it down to where I'm pretty much know exactly what to do. I have it very specific, which I will detail in the strategy. It's very specific gameplay. I spent a few hours on this, actually, quite a few hours. For some reason, it took me a really long fucking time for this one stage. I'm not sure why. But it is a hard stage. So, you can see it's one of those memorization type of games for sure. But you also have a lot of room to react. But when it gets into the later stages, you're going to be relying more on memorization than you are on your reactions, for sure. Some of the earlier stages, you can kind of get by on your reactions for a little bit. But, it's not going to take too long to where you really have to die repeatedly and memorize the stages, just like you would in a lot of old games like Contra, Castlevania, etc. It's kind of hard to describe this game. It even reminds me a bit of Revenge of Shinobi. It has a lot of... It really has a lot... There's a lot of games that this really is like a hybrid of. And it just feels like its own unique game. The soundtrack is pretty solid. Nothing that's going to be super memorable, but it's pretty good. But the gameplay is awesome. I really like the gameplay. The art style is cool. I like the art style. Reminds me of an old game, like 16-bit game. And you got your bosses and mini-bosses throughout the stages. Like I said, you got a nice variety of different arrow types. You also have your sword slash for up close. You can jump in sword slash as well. The sword slash does a lot of damage, but of course it's harder to hit with. And as I said, you can select from your different weapons, your different magics. So here you see me using this magic with this long-haired motherfucker. Now this shit will give me a screen clearing magic, which was helpful for this boss. But I probably ended up not having to use it, but it is very useful for certain parts. And all the magics kind of have their use. I mean, there's probably one that I didn't really use, but it gives you more powerful arrows. I think that's the only one I never really used. But most of them are useful for some certain scenario, I found. And of course, you have a health bar, so you can take usually maybe 3 or 4 hits at default, but as you play the game, you will unlock these temporary health bar upgrades, and you'll get some health back, too, from some items. So, the temporary health upgrade, of course, it only lasts for that life. So if you do lose a life, you'll be sent back to wherever the stage checkpoint is, and you'll have your default amount of health. So, you don't really want to die too much. But, aside from that, it does get scarce later in the game where the checkpoints are very infrequent. So you do have to beat a large portion of the stage without dying to get to the next checkpoint. This last stage is pretty long, as you can see, and I think it only has 2 checkpoints. Maybe 3. I don't know if the boss itself has a checkpoint, but maybe 3, but it's a pretty long stage. So you really do have to have it down. And you can see I really had the stage down pretty well. I wasn't taking a ton of damage. And so that was a lot of memorization and just learning enemy spawns and what to use on what, basically, like you do a lot with these old games. You can see the charged arrow really does a nice little clear out of these faces. You start off with a diagonal charge shot. And there's a lot of little strategies like that you memorize, and you're able to, once you have it down, you can kind of blaze through parts, You just have to get it down. It's one of those style of games, and it's a really good one. I mean, the only issue that annoyed me was I would have liked maybe a few more checkpoints in some of the stages. But of course, that's not really something I would call much of a flaw with the game. It's just more of an irritation, as far as like you do have to learn pretty big chunks before you get to the checkpoints. It's a very linear game. It's pretty much left to right most of the time. And, sometimes you're going to climb up some stuff and things like that. There is platforming. But pretty much what you see is what you get. This is the type of game it is. It's you got your arrows, your sword, your magics, and you just make your way through the stages. And coming up, you'll see the last boss, which I'm going to show coming up in a moment. And I'll show you where I use the invincibility, how I use that magic on that boss. And it was really useful because the problem with the last boss is it's difficult because you don't have a lot of time to practice the different forms because it's 3 different forms. And, if you fuck up, of course, you end up, when you waste your lives, you get sent back to the beginning of the stage. So you don't get a lot of time to practice it. So since I never really learned how to fight the 3rd form well, I just save up my magic for the 3rd form of the dragon, and I use the invincibility, and I just fucking spam arrows on it and kill it that way. So that made the last boss a lot more manageable. That's part of my strat that I cover, in the tutorial. But the last boss is definitely cool. The boss fights are all really good for the most part. You do have a lot of recycled bosses and things that you fight again, enemies that reappear, but, kind of a common thing with a lot of older games that this is based on, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, sometimes you're fighting 2 bosses at once and things like that instead of just one. So it mixes it up a little bit. So this is the final boss. You see I took out his 1st form super fast. I had a whole strategy for all this shit that I used. And I'll break all that down in the tutorial. And what magics to save up and all that shit. But it is a cool fight. And you can always pause to decide what you want to do next. I was trying to decide what weapon I was going to use for what form. You can pause the game and kind of just look at your surroundings and decide what you're going to do next. So that helps. But really, the 2nd form is easy once you know the pattern. But it can be a little hard to learn some of these patterns just because, you don't have a lot of time to practice. And I didn't get a chance really to practice the 3rd form much at all after this. So what I did was I just saved up my invincibility magic for this 3rd form. And then and now I use the invincibility magic on this part. And then I was able to just like spam the boss to death. So it was a good strat, The 3rd form has a lot of shit that's kind of tricky to dodge. I mean, I'm sure I could learn it if I had the time to practice it. But I just went the invincibility route. So you can see different magics are good for different scenarios. There's a lot of creative ways that you can use them to finish off the stages. Invincibility magic is really expensive and it requires a ton of magic points, so it's not something you can just spam. It's all well balanced like that. Like the magics are not something you can just use continuously and spam. It's a well balanced game. And I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Like to me, it's quite a good game. I don't know if I would say it's on the level of greatness as some of the better games, but I would say it's definitely up there. I found it to be quite a good game, and I would definitely recommend it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.